I'm looking forward to it. So today I will present you my paper on intermunicipal cooperation. So this paper relates to the long-studied question of what is the optimal jurisdiction size. And in practice, if you look around the developed world, you can see that central governments are generally seeking to consolidate their territory, in particular by encouraging intermunicipal cooperation. Their main goal being to achieve some economies of scale in the provision of local public goods. So one recent example can be Japan. So recently, the Japanese government set very high financial incentives to encourage municipalities to merge by giving them extra money if they agreed to do so. However, despite such willingness by central governments, municipalities are often quite reluctant to cooperate with each other. So I will study municipality resistance in the case of France, but again, this is true all over the world. Again, in Japan, despite those financial incentives, many municipalities refuse to merge, leading to a post-merger number of municipalities higher than what the government would have liked to impose. Similarly, if you look at the American history, after a large wave of consolidation in the 19th century, municipalities became less and less willing to cooperate. The earliest example being Brookline that refused to join Boston at the end of the 19th century. So the question I ask in this paper is what can explain municipalities' resistance against cooperation? And we know from the literature that municipalities face a trade-off. So on one side, by cooperating, municipalities may hope to get some benefits coming from the overall efficiency gains and economies of scale. So for instance, they may hope to reduce the cost of local public goods. But on the other side, by cooperating, municipalities are also losing autonomy as they have to share their own public policies with other municipalities that might have different preferences. And so the goal of this paper is to identify the actual consequences of this loss of autonomy and to assess whether it can explain resistance beyond, let's say, ideological, cultural, or political considerations. So in other words, I want to know whether a municipality does not want to cooperate only, let's say, for ideological reasons, or whether a municipality does not want to cooperate because it involves actual negative consequences for the residents. One example could be unwanted construction. So if by cooperating, you have to share your urban planning and housing supply policies with other municipalities, you might end up with too many constructions on your territory compared to what you would have chosen alone. Similarly, if you have to jointly decide over the location of public services, you might end up further away from public services than desired. And understanding what are the local consequences of cooperation is key if you want to understand why some municipalities are reluctant to cooperate, and thus why consolidation might fail. And it's also key for the design of consolidation policies. So if you want to incentivize cooperation and perhaps compensate the losers, then it's important to understand what are the consequences explaining their resistance. However, assessing such consequences is empirically challenging for at least two main reasons. The first one is that while intermunicipal cooperation can take various forms, most of the empirical literature has looked at the case of full mergers, in which case municipalities disappear after the merge and data are typically collected at the post-merger level. So this makes it difficult to look at the situation of an individual municipalities before and after. And this is why this literature has mainly looked at the aggregate impact of consolidation. So one nice exception is the paper by Gabriel and his co-authors he alluded to at the beginning of his presentation, where they are using geocoded live data. And as he points out, again, you have to use very specific data to be able to look at the impact for individual municipalities in the case of full mergers. And then when it's not a full merger, it's usually a voluntary process, meaning that municipalities choose whether or not to cooperate with each other. In which case, you can only observe the consequences for municipalities that were willing to cooperate, and so for which the costs are likely to be the lowest. So this paper overcomes those challenges by exploiting a 2010 reform in France that made intermunicipal cooperation mandatory. So this law forced isolated municipalities that were not cooperating before to enter into an intermunicipal community. And so importantly, when a municipality enters into a community, it does not disappear as it is the case in full merger, but the municipality coexists with this new higher level of governance and has to share its public policies with its neighbors. And so I can compare the situation of municipalities before and after integration. And more precisely, I implement a difference in differences strategy, where I compare before and after the 2010 law. On one side, municipalities that were forced to integrate by the law, and on the other side, municipalities that were already part of a community and thus not affected by the 2010 reform. So under the common trend assumption, for which I will provide support, I can assess the causal impact of integration on those resisting municipalities that did not want to cooperate. And by doing so, I can identify the local consequences that help explain why they were resisting in the first place. So let me say a little bit more about what it means intermunicipal cooperation in France and what it means to lose autonomy in this context. So as I said, intermunicipal cooperation takes the form of intermunicipal communities. So inside communities, municipalities have to share their public policies, and thus they coexist with this new higher level of governance. This is actually a form of cooperation that is quite widespread in the world. So you have this in France, but also Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, Ireland, for instance, or even Brazil. And to give you an idea, in France, a community will gather on average 17 municipalities. So what do they have to share exactly, and why it could be costly to lose autonomy? Well, the first thing they have to share is urban planning, meaning that the communities will be in charge of the land use and housing supply policies. So the communities will be the one choosing where and how much to build in each of the member municipalities. As a result, as a municipality, when you enter into a community, you cannot decide anymore how many building permits to grant on your own territory. Why this can be costly? Well, following the large literature on housing restrictions, there are several costs coming with new construction that can explain why a municipality might prefer to keep control over its own housing supply. So the first one is referred to as NIMBYism, so not in my backyard, which describes the fact that residents tend to oppose new construction because they do not want to have a building popping up in their backyard. On top of less space available, residents might oppose new construction because they do not want to have different people coming in, and in particular, poor neighbors or more immigrants, for instance. And finally, homeowners might be especially reluctant to see new construction as it might decrease housing prices. So for all of these reasons, municipalities might be reluctant to cooperate over their urban planning policies and might prefer to stay alone. So let me here give you one example of a resisting municipality. So this municipality is Gardanne. Gardanne is located in the south of France. And so Gardanne was still isolated in 2010 and forced to enter a community. And this is the reaction of Gardanne to the 2010 law. So here at the bottom, you have a picture of a municipal councillor from Gardanne who is protesting in the street of Marseille, the big city next to Gardanne, against the reform, with stickers on her chest saying, "Don't touch my municipality." And above is a quote taken from the website of the municipality at the time of the law, saying, "How can we stay in control of our urban planning and preserve our 50% of natural spaces if, as the law implies, local urban planning could be managed far from here?" So this is a typical example of a municipality claiming to resist, not to share its urban planning policies. So next, the second main thing municipalities have to share is the joint delivery of some public services. So typically the community will be in charge of sport, cultural facilities, as well as daycare facilities. And so the community will be the one deciding where to locate public service facilities. And here the goal of the community will be to rationalize the offer of public services, and that the community might tend to concentrate resources in facilities that are located in densely populated areas. As a result, low-density municipalities, typically rural municipalities, might fear that by entering a community, they might lose some public service facilities, which is costly as it would increase the distance to public services for their residents. So I'm sure you have heard about the Yellow Vest movement in France, and actually one claim of the Yellow Vest movement was precisely that rural areas were left aside and increasingly further away from public services. And so in this paper, my goal is to test causally whether indeed municipalities forced to enter a community had to face such cost and whether it can help explain why they did not want to cooperate in the first place. And so first, I will look at whether, as feared by Gardanne in my example, resisting municipalities had to face an increase in construction. And then whether, as claimed by the Yellow Vest movement, whether resisting municipalities had to face a loss of public services. So here is a quick preview of the results. So the bottom line is that I do provide evidence that local consequences of integration help explain resistance. So the answer will be yes to the two preceding questions, but I will show you that different types of municipalities face a different cost. And so first, I show that urban municipalities indeed had to face a large increase in construction. On average, I find that municipalities forced to enter a community experience an increase of 12.4% in the number of building permits delivered per year in their municipality. I also find that this increase in construction is driven by attractive and densely built municipalities. So typically urban municipalities where more construction means less space available and more people in your backyard. Second, I provide evidence that rural municipalities had to face a loss of local public services. So exploiting new data at the local level on public libraries and daycare facilities, I provide suggestive evidence that they ended up with 20% fewer facilities located on their territory. And then I do an additional exercise to check whether indeed those effects can account for why they were resisting. And so to do so, I compare this to the impact for municipalities that instead voluntarily integrated before the law. So for instance, I will look at a municipality that chose happily to join a community in 2004, and I will look at what happened to its building permits in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The idea is that if we think that municipalities were resisting to avoid an increase in construction, we should see a differential impact for municipalities that instead chose to integrate. And indeed, I do not find any impact on construction for municipalities that voluntarily integrated before the law. Hence, only municipalities that did not want to cooperate faced such effect, supporting that this is why they did not want to integrate. And finally, in the last part of the paper, I explore the benefits of integration. So I look at additional aspects of integration for which municipalities could expect some benefits to see what they were ready to give up by not integrating. And so first I look at a large-scale public service, which is public transport, so this time at the municipal level, and fiscal revenues. And I find that municipalities forced to integrate, that forced integration more than doubled their chance of getting access to a public transport network, and that it increased their fiscal revenues by 13%. I also find that those gains are very similar to what experienced municipalities that voluntarily integrated before the law. So this suggests that they were not resisting anticipating a lower share of the benefits, but rather that those benefits were not high enough to cover for the cost of integration. So for the sake of time, I will be a bit quick on the very large literature to which this paper relates, but let me just emphasize my contribution to three main strands. So the first one is the very large literature on the optimal size of jurisdictions. And here I want to emphasize one theoretical result from Alesina and Spolaro's Size of Nations that say that if you let political agents choose over the number of jurisdictions, you will end up with too many jurisdictions compared to what a social planner would choose. And this is due to the fact that political agents won't internalize the aggregate benefit of size and would want to split up to avoid the cost, the local cost. And so this paper contributes to this literature by empirically investigating what are the local consequences preventing aggregation from happening. So then I'm related to the large literature on intermunicipal cooperation. And as I alluded to, this paper make a contribution by causally looking at the impact on individual municipalities and more precisely on those that were resisting cooperation to better understand why. I'm also able to look at the impact on the wide range of outcomes. And in particular, I investigate a novel aspect that has not been studied before in the context of intermunicipal cooperation, which is the impact on urban planning and housing supply policies. And so in this respect, I'm also related to the urban literatures on housing restrictions. So this paper showed that NIMBYism seems to be a strong driver of municipalities' resistance against cooperation. And I also showed that by transferring housing supply decisions to the municipal level to the intermunicipal level, you can increase construction and thus overcome local housing restrictions. So this is the roadmap for the rest of the talk. I will now describe in more details the institutional setting, then present you my sample and empirical strategy before turning to the main results. So maybe I can pause here to see if there are any clarifying questions at this stage.
No question at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's speak a little bit more about France then. So as you may know, and as Gabriel said in his presentation, France counts an insanely high number of municipalities. So in 2010, around 36,000 municipalities, which is about 40% of the total number of European municipalities. So in the 70s, the French government tried but failed to force municipalities to merge. And so instead, the French government offered the possibility to neighboring municipalities to create and join intermunicipal communities. So again, those communities are in charge mainly of urban planning policies and the joint delivery of public services. They also raise local taxes. So we have 4 local taxes in France, 1 business tax and 3 household taxes. And so the community decides over 2 main choices. So either the community decides to take the business tax, in which case you have the same tax rate and tax base for the whole community, or the community decides to add a community tax on top of the municipal tax to the 4 local taxes. So basically the community will raise taxes either in place or on top of municipality. So then how decisions are made inside the communities. So the decision making is made by a board, which is composed of members of the different municipal councils. And for each municipality, the number of seats the municipality gets will be proportional to its population, with 2 restrictions: that each municipality gets at least 1 seat and no municipality gets more than half of the seats. And then decisions are taken at the majority vote. So the real turning point for intermunicipal community occurred in 1999 with the so-called Chevènement law that introduced new state transfers to intermunicipal communities. And so since then, the French government is attributing a grant each year to each community on top of the grant it was already attributing to each municipality. So this was basically a very high financial incentive for municipality to create and join communities. And this explains why only half of municipalities were integrated in 1999, and it rose to 95% in 2010. Still, 5%, or around 1,800 municipalities, were still not part of the community at this time. And here are those last isolated municipalities. So in red on the map, you have the French municipalities that were still not part of the community in 2010 and thus forced to enter one. On the reverse, in blue, you have municipalities that were already part of the community at the time of the law and thus not affected in 2010. And here, the gray areas are excluded from my sample. I will come back to this. But just to show you that while you have a lot of red dots in the center north, in Île-de-France, you can find isolated municipalities all over the country. And then in 2010, a new law passed with the goal of drawing a new map of intermunicipal communities to organize the territory more effectively. It introduced 2 new requirements. The first one is that all municipalities have to be part of an intermunicipal community, with the exception of Paris and 3 departments around Paris, as well as few islands. The second requirement is that communities must be at least 5,000 inhabitants, with the exceptions of mountain zones where municipalities are typically very small and far from each other. So I will focus on the first requirement and look at what happened to municipalities that were forced to enter a community. The law was implemented by the departmental prefect, so the state authority at the departmental level, between 2011 and 2014. The vast majority of isolated municipalities, 73% of them, joined existing communities, whereas the rest created new communities with other isolated neighbors. And to give you an idea, a municipality forced to enter a community represented on average only 5% of the population of the community it joined. In 2014, we had a full compliance. So all municipalities were part of a community, and we had a bit more of 2,000 intermunicipal communities in France, each one gathering on average 17 municipalities. All right, so in my sample, I'm considering a balanced panel of French municipalities. And as you already guessed, my treatment group will be made of those isolated municipalities that were still not integrated in 2010. On the reverse, my control group will be made of municipalities that were already integrated at the time of the law. And I further restrict my control group to municipalities that were part of a community since 1999, meaning that they integrated the community long before the law. Hence, I exclude from my sample municipalities that integrated between 2000 and 2010 closer to the law. I'm making this restriction to ensure that the shift in integration status is not affecting my control group during the period of interest. Now my results are robust if I expand my control group and also include those that integrated closer to the law. And finally, those gray areas, so I exclude from my sample the law exceptions, so the Grand Paris, islands, and mountain zones. So in total, I have a balanced panel of 16,300 municipalities, about 1,300 in my treatment group. So here on the graph, just to illustrate the sample, I plot the share of municipalities that belong to a community in each of my group. So in blue is my control group, and by construction, all municipalities in my control group are part of a community since 1999 until today. On the reverse, in red is my treatment group, and here no municipality is part of a community until 2010, when they are forced to enter and gradually enter a community. So in 2013, 30% of them were part of a community, then 80% in 2013, and the last 20% in 2014. So let me give you an idea of the typical treated municipality in my sample. So here I just show you a few statistics on my sample, taken all in 2010. If you want, I have more descriptive statistics available. And just for a comparison, I show you the same statistics for my control group. So focusing on the treatment group, you can see that the average treated municipality in 2010 had 1,600 inhabitants. The majority of treated municipalities, 64% of them, were part of an urban area. They had about 5% of immigrants, and unemployment at this time was about 8%. So if you look at the same characteristics in the control group this time, you can see that controlled municipalities are quite similar based on those characteristics. One difference is that treated municipalities tend to be a bit richer on average. So this is the annual taxable income per capita, which is 14,200 in the treatment group compared to 12,600 in the control group. But as you can see, I have also a very large standard deviation in my treatment group, showing that I do not have only the richest municipalities, I also have poorer ones. And finally, perhaps accordingly, treated municipalities are a bit more likely to have a mayor that is on the right side of the political spectrum. So overall, what I want you to take away from this table is that my treated group is quite representative of an average French municipality in 2010, and also that I have a quite diverse treated group that will allow me to do some heterogeneity analysis. So about the specification, so I will focus my analysis around the 2010 law from 2004 to 2018, and I will implement a difference in differences strategy. So all my outcome will be at the municipal level. So for instance, it will be the number of building permits in municipality M at time t, that I will regress on the interaction between a dummy for being after 2010, after the law, and a dummy for being in my treatment group, being forced to integrate a community. I also include time and municipality fixed effects. So time fixed effect will control for any event during the period affecting all municipalities the same way, whereas municipality fixed effect will control for any unobserved factors that are constant across time. And I cluster my standard errors at the municipality level. I also standardize all my outcomes. So I divide my outcomes by the population in 2010, and I multiply by 10,000. So it will be the number of building permits per 10,000 inhabitants. The identification assumption is the common trend assumption, namely that absent the law, municipalities would have evolved the same way in the treatment and control groups. So I cannot directly test for the common trend assumption, but I will show you pre-trends for all the outcomes of interest. So we'll look visually at the pre-trends, and I also test for the joint significance. In the paper, I also run a series of placebo tests using the pre-treatment period. I also test the robustness of the result using a propensity score matching. And finally, I use a bunch of alternative control groups to address potential spillover. So let me now turn to the main results, and I will spend most of my time looking at the result on housing supply, which is the key innovation of the paper. But I just want to let anyone who wants to ask a clarifying question at this stage, if needed. All right, so I hope it means all is clear up to now. All right, so let's begin by first looking at whether municipalities forced to integrate had to face an increase in construction, as feared by Gardan, my example in the introduction. So as you already know, the answer is yes. Here is the impact on the number of housing building permits per 10,000 inhabitants. So here on the graph, each dot represents the interaction between a year dummy and a dummy for being in my control group, all compared to 2010. So for instance, this first dot here will be the impact of being in my treatment group compared to the control group in 2004 compared to 2010. So basically, when we look at the pre-trend, so prior to 2010, you can see that the coefficients are close to 0 and they are not significant nor jointly significant. On the reverse, after 2010, you see a large increasing trend showing that the number of building permits increased much more in treated municipalities compared to controlled municipalities. And I find that municipalities forced to integrate experience on average an increase of 8.2 building permits per year per 10,000 inhabitants. So what does it mean in magnitude? So prior to 2010, on average, treated municipalities were delivering 66 building permits per year. So an effect of 8.2 is basically an increase of 12.4% in the number of building permits delivered per year in resisting municipalities. And so next, if we look at which types of building permits are driving this effect, so here, this is the table. So the first column gives you the impact on all building permits I showed you on the graph, so an increase of 8.2. And then I distinguish in column 2 and 3 between building permits that are given for new constructions on empty lands or building permits that are given for an extension of an existing building, for instance, adding a floor. And as you can see here, the impact is basically largely driven by building permits for new construction on empty lands. So this is consistent with forced integration leading to more construction and less space available for the residents. So next, I look at what happened instead for municipalities that voluntarily integrated. So we have seen that municipalities that were forced to integrate and that did not want to integrate saw a large increase in construction. And so now I wonder whether municipalities that voluntarily integrated experience the same. So here I change my sample and I focus on municipalities that were previously excluded from the sample, those that integrated voluntarily between 2000 and 2010. And here I use a staggered adoption design, meaning that the year of integration is the year of the treatment. So for instance, I will look at a municipality integrating in 2004 and look at what happens to its building permits in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and even above. To overcome the challenges of staggered adoption design, I also test the robustness to using a novel method developed by Chaise-Martin and Dautefeuille. And so here I show you the graph. So -1 would be the year just prior integration, 0 the year where the municipality joined a community. And then I look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even after 5 years. And this is the method by the second method I use. So basically what you can see on the two graphs is not much. So it does not seem that there is any impact on construction from municipalities that chose to enter a community. And so the bottom line is that only resisting municipalities experience an increase in construction. So this supports the claim that they were resisting cooperation not to experience such effect. And so I now investigate which municipalities are driving the effect to better understand why they are resisting new construction. So as I told you in the introduction, there are several costs coming with new construction that depend on the municipality characteristics. So first, if we think that municipalities did not want new construction due to NIMBY reason, because they did not want more people in their backyard, then we should find that the effect is typically driven by attractive and densely built municipalities, for which more construction means less space available. On the reverse, if we think that they were mainly resisting to avoid having different people coming into their municipality, we should see that the effect is driven by municipalities whose neighbors are more different. And finally, if we think that homeowners were the one resisting cooperation, then we should find that the effect is stronger in municipalities with a high share of homeowners. And I will also directly look at the impact on housing prices. So let's first look at whether the impact is driven by typical NIMBY municipalities. So for municipalities that are defined as attractive and high demand. So to look at this, I look at the effect depending on the location of the municipality inside the urban area. So here the idea is the idea of the monocentric model, namely that the closer you are to the CBD, to the central business district, where the activity is, the higher the housing demand and housing prices. So I know that in the US, the monocentric model is not well verified. Typically, suburbs are the most attractive places. But in France and generally in Europe, this model is well verified. And we do have that housing prices tend to be the highest in the center. And so here, the first column, again, give you the overall impact on all the sample. And then I split depending on the location in the urban area. And as you can see on column 3, basically, all the impact is driven by municipalities that are located inside an urban area and which are connected to the employment center. And the effect is even the strongest for municipalities that are in the core of the urban area, so right at the center. So typically Gardanne, which is next to Marseille and Aix-en-Provence, very close to the employment center, is at the core of the urban area. And so for municipalities located in the core, they experience an increase of 34% in the number of building permits delivered per year. So yes, it seems that the impact is largely driven by municipalities where the demand is high, attractive municipalities. And I obtain similar results if I look depending on how rich the municipality is, looking at residents' income. And next, I look at whether the impact is even stronger for municipalities that are densely built. So here I focus at municipalities inside the urban areas that are driving the effect. And I split first my sample between rural and urban municipalities. So the effect is a bit messier for urban municipalities. It's a smaller part of my sample. But as you can see, in magnitude, the effect tends to be larger for urban municipalities compared to rural municipalities. And the same conclusion holds if I take a continuous measure of housing density, so the number of buildings per square kilometers. I do find that the impact is stronger for municipalities that are above the housing density median. So overall, yes, it seems that the effect is driven by attractive and densely built municipalities, so typically NIMBY municipalities that do not want new construction in their backyards. On the reverse, I do not find that the impact is driven by municipalities whose neighbors are different, so whose neighbors are either poorer or more likely to be immigrants, unemployed, or less politically aligned. I do not find either that the effect is stronger in municipalities with a large share of homeowners. And when I look directly at housing prices, I do not see a significant drop in housing prices, at least on the short run, which is also consistent with the impact being driven by high demand municipalities as construction takes place in places that tended to be restrictive and where now you can move and where the demand for housing is very high. So overall, it seems that municipalities resisting to avoid an increase in construction are typically urban, attractive municipalities that did not want more construction in their backyard. And finally, I look at the last outcome related to housing supply, which is economic activity, to see whether this increase in construction is associated or followed by an increase in economic activity. And so to measure economic activity, here I take the number of firm creation, so the number of new establishments inside the municipality per 10,000 inhabitants. So on the left-hand side, I take all establishments, And on the right-hand side, I exclude individual entrepreneurs because their inclusion, they are not included over all the periods. So to have the same definition from 2006 to 2018, I exclude this category. But basically, as you can see, that there is no effect on the number of new establishments in the municipality. And so it seems that the increase in construction is actually not associated to an increase in economic activity. So this supports the fact that this increase in construction is really driven by the entry into the community and by the new regulation in terms of housing supply, and that is not compensated by an increase in economic activity for the residents who only see new construction in their backyard. So in the last 10 minutes, I will now turn to the local public services before looking at additional potential benefits of integration. So we have seen that the increase in construction helps explain why urban municipalities were against cooperation. But then what about rural municipalities, and what about other consequences of integration? And so here I look at the impact on local public services. So again, the potential story here is that communities will try to rationalize the offer of public services, and thus will try to concentrate resources in highly densely populated areas. As a result, a rural municipality might fear that by entering a community, it will lose some local public service facilities, which will then increase the distance to public services for their residents. And so to look at whether this is the case, I gathered data at the local level on two different public services. So first, the number of daycare facilities, as well as the number of daycare spots available for children, and then the number of public libraries. So here the result will be a little bit more suggestive. You will see that I have less history in the data. For daycare facilities, I cover the whole French territory, but for public libraries, it's restricted to only 7 departments. But as you will see, the results go in the exact same direction for those two different public services, which can reinforce the conclusion we can draw. So this is what I obtained for the impact on daycare facilities. So here the outcome is really the number of daycare buildings, facilities located inside the municipality at time t. So as you can see on the full sample here, you have a slight decreasing trend. But what is more interesting is when I split my sample between rural and urban municipalities. As you can see, only rural municipalities display this decreasing trend, whereas for urban municipalities, you do not see any change in the trend. So it seemed that rural municipality ended up with fewer daycare facilities, even if the coefficient is not significant. And then when I look not at the number of buildings, but the number of spots available for children, you can see a very similar pattern. So again, an overall decrease, but that is only driven by rural municipalities. Here, the estimate is significant at the 10% level and would suggest that rural municipalities ended up with 2 spots less after integration, or reduction of almost 50%. Interestingly, we have the same pattern if we look this time at public libraries. So again, an overall decrease that is only driven by rural places. The impact is also significant at the 10% level and suggests that rural municipalities forced to integrate ended up with 1 public library less, or a decrease of 20%. So overall, these results are consistent with intermunicipal communities concentrating resources in more urban places, and thus closing down or not developing places inside rural municipalities. So finally, I will look at 2 additional aspects of intermunicipal cooperation for which municipalities might have hoped to gain some benefits. And so my goal here is to see what benefits resisting municipalities were ready to give up by not integrating. So first, I look at 1 large-scale public service for which you can expect some economies of scale, or at least some coordination. So this is quite related to the paper by Gabriel, showing that basically borders tend to lead to less cooperation on public transport networks. And then I look at fiscal revenues per capita. So here you could expect gains from two channels. The first one would be additional transfer by the state, because once you enter into the community, you keep your own grant, but you also indirectly benefit from the grant given to the community. And also by entering the community, it might lower tax competition with your neighbors. So as studied by Marie, for instance, in the case of France, which could raise tax rate and tax revenues. So first I look at public transport. So here the outcome is one is a dummy equal to 1 if the municipality has access to a public transport network, so to a municipal public transport network. So here I have data for all France except Île-de-France. So as you can see, there is a slight decreasing pre-trend showing that access to public transport increased more in controlled municipalities compared to treated municipalities prior to the law. Whereas after their forced integration, you see a very large increasing trend showing that access to public transport increased way more in municipalities forced to integrate. And so basically prior to 2010, only 2.4% of them had access to a public transport. And this probability increased by 3.3 percentage points on average after their forced integration. And if you look at the last period in 2017, it even increased by 7 percentage points. So basically it means that forced integration more than doubled or even tripled their probability of being connected to a public transport network. And interestingly, when I look at municipalities that instead voluntarily integrated, so here if we focus on the second method that is better at capturing a long run effect, you can also see a positive impact for municipalities that chose to enter a community before the law. So after 5 years, you do see that it increased the probability of being connected by a bit more than 4 percentage points. So both municipalities that were forced to enter and those that voluntarily integrated seem to gain access to public transport. And finally, the last outcome is fiscal revenues. So here I define fiscal revenues as both tax revenues and the state transfer, all per capita. So if you are an isolated municipality, I will consider only your own revenues, so your own tax revenues and your own state transfer. Whether if you're a part of a community, I will consider your own revenues, but also the community revenues scaled by the population you represent inside the community, given that now you also benefit from the community revenues as the community is in charge of some of your public services. And so here you can again see a very large increasing trend. And basically I find that municipalities forced to integrate experience an increase of 92 euros per capita per year in their fiscal revenues, which is an increase of about 13%. I find very similar impacts, so around 90 to 100 euros for municipalities that instead voluntarily integrated. So the bottom line here is that resisting municipalities experience some benefits of integration, at least in terms of public transport and fiscal revenues, and at least as much as municipalities that voluntarily integrated. So this suggests that municipalities were not resisting cooperation, anticipating they would get a lower share of the benefits, but rather that those benefits were not high enough to compensate for the cost of integration in terms of excess construction and a loss of public services. It also suggests that those benefits can provide a lower bound for the value associated to NIMBYism, to not having new construction in your backyard, and the value associated to having local public services inside your municipality. So to conclude, this paper provides evidence that municipalities' resistance is at least partly driven by actual local consequences of integration. So unwanted increase in construction for urban municipalities and a loss of local public services for rural municipalities. So this might help us think about consolidation more generally, showing that resistance is not only driven by politics or ideology, but that we should also pay attention to the actual local consequences for municipalities. I believe that these results might have several policy implications. So first, for the design of consolidation policies. So if you want to incentivize cooperation and perhaps to compensate those that do not want to cooperate, it's important to understand why they do not want to do so and why they're trying to avoid by not cooperating. And in particular, policymakers should have in mind that rural and urban municipalities are not facing the same consequences. The second policy implication is in terms of housing restrictions. So basically, I show that when you transfer the decision to a higher level, so when you transfer housing supply decisions from the municipality to the intermunicipal community, you can increase construction and overcome local housing restrictions. So this is highly relevant in light of the large literature showing the adverse effect of local housing restrictions on productivity, but also on the environment through urban sprawl. And finally, this paper opens avenue for future research. So in this paper, I really wanted to causally identify the moving pieces at the local level and the local benefits and cost of integration. And so this research can inform welfare model that would look at the broad welfare analysis of consolidation reforms, and it can inform those models on what are the key parameters to take into account. So thank you very much for your attention and again for organizing this seminar, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you for this interesting presentation. We have time for a few questions. So you can virtually raise your hand to notify your question.
I would have a few questions if I may.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there are two things. So first, two things which are a bit more the theoretical side or kind of things that when you do these things often come to mind. And I just wanted to see how you think about this. So first is the question of, I mean, selection into isolation. So do you? It's probably not random that there are some are leftovers and others are not. Even though I saw the descriptive statistics and they're quite quite similar, but I mean these are some of the observables and there are naturally many more. So the first thing, so selection to isolation. Second thing is how to think about spillovers, which I think links to the paper that we will have in November 17th. Question of spillovers at the local level in public in amenities and things like this. How does this fit in the framework, or the fact that if you're left alone in isolation around many that have consolidated, is it different than if you're left alone around many that are left alone? So these first two things. Second, it's more on the 2 points on how you estimated the thing. So first, I'm not sure the normalization by per 10,000 inhabitants in 2010. I'm not sure whether this is completely innocuous, in a sense that you do have also population effects. You might have growth or decline in population over time, which then affects the daycare. The number of daycare spots, for example, might decline, but if population decline, you might actually have a per capita that is actually positive, even though in 2010. So in a sense, the normalization by 2010 population is a bit. I'm not sure that it's the best way to go. I would consider, in that case, looking at just area or yearly population as a normalization strategy. Because since there is this interaction effect, it's not the fixed effect. I don't think captures everything, but maybe I'm wrong. And the second thing is did you consider looking at weighted access to, because of access to public facilities, for example, the fact that public services increase but decline in daycare, it might actually be that since the access increases, you might still be better off in terms of access to public amenities within kind of, I think there's some measures of accessible public facilities within half an hour, whether this actually decreased or might have actually increased. Yeah, I think that was my main point.
Thank you very much. They're all great points, so I will try to answer them all, or at least as best as I can. So selection into isolation. So for sure, I'm not claiming that my two groups are random, and I'm even trying to understand why they did not want to enter. So of course, my treatment group is made of those that chose not to enter, and my control group of those that chose to integrate early. And so that's why it's not an RCT, it's really a diff in diff. So my goal is not to claim that they are the same, but to ensure that they have similar trajectories close to the law. So that's why I take those that integrated long ago, and I test for the pretrends, which is ultimately an empirical question. Now more on the theory. So why who selected, given that they are similar in terms of characteristics. So what I have a discussion on this in the paper. What I show is that while they are similar, they tend to be closer to large municipalities, meaning that once they enter the community, they have a lower bargaining power inside the community. So when I compute the bargaining power, the share of the population they represent compared to the other in the community, it tends to be lower than for the other municipalities. So in the sense, those municipalities are the ones losing the most power. And so the whole point in the paper is to understand what it means to lose power. And so you can have like two similar municipalities, but if you put one that loses a lot of power, it will have more construction and stuff. But if the other one secures high enough bargaining power, it won't. So that would be the story. Then regarding spillovers, so I mean, so the fact of being isolated, so for instance, in terms of urban planning, so whether you're close or not to another intermunicipal community, when you're isolated, like no one would question your urban planning decisions. And so it's hard to see in which way you would benefit for urban planning decisions from your neighbors. Similarly, for like public services, I mean, there is a little spillover going into the main stuff I'm looking at. And I also look at the effect depending on whether you are surrounded only by integrated places or surrounded by isolated places, because it happens. So if you remember the map, it happens that you have, a lot of red dots next to each other, and the effect is very similar for those. So the fact, it does not seem that you were able to free ride in some sense. So regarding the normalization, so the reason I did this normalization was just to give the same weight, to different sized municipalities. And at first, I did not want to divide by the yearly population just to see one thing moving, right? So I did not want to have potentially both the denominator and numerator moving. Now, I agree that for daycare, it would be important to know whether also the population is declining. So there is little reason first to think that just entering the community would lead to a decrease in the size of the population. But I also look at this by dividing by the number of households at year T, and it does not impact the results. So I'm not using the population because, it's the census, which is a bit tricky to have it year by year. So I use the number of households from fiscal data. And finally, whether rural municipalities might be better off at the end. So it might, on the long run, it might be the case that, they lost the small libraries next door, but the community was able to invest into this huge, nice library in the center. And that would be the story, right? That would be why we're pushing for communities in France now. Now my goal was more to see the distributional impact in terms of public services. So for the urban municipality, it's just winning, you still have your thing next door and it's even bigger. For the rural municipality, on the short run, it means still like using a public library. And for daycare, it might be even more costly because it's harder to see, really the quality thing, and having a daycare next door for your kids might be even more valuable. And again, I have this, a bit revealed preference argument saying that those municipalities refuse to enter. And also when you look at, the Yellow Vest movement and all the stuff around like proximity to public services, it seems to be a big deal. But again, at least maybe on the short run, and maybe they would realize that, it was not worth it resisting so much. So thank you very much. No, that's all great points.
Is there other question? So I have a question. I may be wrong, but not all intermunicipalities share housing permit competencies. So have you tried to look only at the subsample of intermunicipality which shares this competency? And more generally on local public facilities, have you tested by controlling if these competencies are actually shared at the intermunicipal level?
Yeah, so regarding the building permits, so there are lots of different cases. So by law, every intermunicipal communities have to share like aménagement, which would be broadly defined building permits. And then it's more or less stringent. So some have the PLU, which is actual urban planning that is very stringent and imposed on municipalities. For other, it would be a bit less, let's say, institutionalized. But if you take like community status, they all have a competency linked to urban planning. Most of the time, the delivery of building permits is still done by the municipality, administratively speaking. But in all cases, municipalities have to comply with some rules at the community level on urban planning. So I have looked at whether the results vary depending on whether they are part of the biggest community, the most integrated one, which are called Communauté d'agglomération and urbaine. And actually, I still do find very strong results when I exclude those that are part of the most stringent communities. So it seems that every communities have a way to impose some increase in construction, which is consistent with the status where you see that they all share some competencies on this. And then regarding public services, so I typically look at two public services for which more than 90% of communities are sharing competencies, so daycare and public libraries. It's a bit harder really to test. So first, I would not have enough power to take the few that are not sharing this. And also, I know that the status of communities are not very well defined for those public services. So I preferred not to go into that, but I really tried to target public services that they vastly share.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one or two other questions.
Actually, if I may, I have one thing that I thought about with the selection into isolation. I mean, you already have a lot of material in the paper, so I'm not sure what I'm saying is any useful, but there is kind of I think the ancestry or the origin of corporations in France at first in the turn of the 20th century was about water organization. So the idea is that, you know, when you're on a river, you want to make sure that the guy above river, uphill, is not doing crazy thing with the water because it, you know, you're affected. And I wonder whether this information, because it's fundamentally based on just rivers and things like this, whether this could actually be used to talk about, I'm not sure how, but I feel that there's something maybe to do with the selection into isolation, you know, comparing places that are similar or not in terms of you know, water situation, because that has, I think the first intermunicipal corporation started with this. And then you could have, you know, an argument that, you know, legacy corporation comparing legacy corporations across each other. And yeah, just a thought. I don't know if it's
no,
useful.
I think that would be interesting also to look, I mean, to understand better the timing of those that integrated early versus the others. Now, for those that were really forced, like the one I'm looking at, you know, the last Gaulois, in some sense, like the one that really did not want, I think that it goes beyond only history because they were really the last one not cooperating. And so that's really what I try to understand in this paper, because I show that they face some real cost. But yeah, I think that would be an interesting instrument, perhaps, to understand why some, like, you know, integrated only in 99, very early before 99, and those like in 2005, because this is not something I explained in the paper. I considered all those that integrated voluntarily and those that were forced. But perhaps that would be a nice way of better understanding the timing. And it's true that I think, like in Brittany, that the department where they integrated the earliest, that could be, you know, consistent with your point.
If I understood correctly your answer to Gabriel, you tried to differentiate the size of the treatment between two sub-control groups. So one with resisting municipalities entirely surrounded by majority of resisting municipalities, And the other one composed.
Yeah, so either you were surrounded also by other isolated, or you were surrounded by integrated places.
Okay. Okay, because the group composed of resisting municipalities surrounded by a majority of municipalities that belong to an intermunicipal group are more likely to resist. And so, yes, so you confirm that there is no significant difference in terms of treatment effect between these two subgroups?
No, so there is no significant difference, and the original reason why I did this test was to check whether, because my whole story is to say that if they had integrated earlier, they would have faced those costs, and that's why they did not want to integrate. A competing interpretation would be that they are punished by the one that are joining because the government had to force them to enter. But actually, when I look at those places that created new communities, so which more like resembled the original process of building a community, I find similar effects. So it seemed that really they did not want to enter because they knew that by cooperating with their neighbors, it would involve some cost. And so no, I do not find significant different impact depending on the share of already integrated municipality that join at the end.
Okay, and have you managed to collect data, prefectural data, to differentiate between cooperation after 2010, that is voluntary, and cooperation decided by a prefectural order?
Yeah, so I was not able to get the prefectural order, but the prefectural order was for the very last one. So basically, if in 2013 you were still not integrated, so what happened is that in 2010, the prefect said to the municipalities, okay, now it's mandatory, you have to be part of a community. And then in 2013, if you were still not part of a community, the prefect could directly force you to enter one. So then I looked at, where is it? Okay, I look at the impact depending on the actual entry date. So the first graph here would be the impact for those that integrated in 2011, 12, 13, and 14. So there are only 20% left in 14 that were really the last one to be forced by the prefect. And so, it seems that the effect might be a bit stronger, but it's really not clear, I mean, compared to the pre-plan. And when I talk to people, so actually I called people that were in place at the time of the law, and they told me that whether or not the prefect forced the municipality at the end really depended on the prefect. So some prefects were super pushy, and they were very good at making municipalities integrated early, and some others let the thing go on and at the end forced them. So it does not seem that it was really the municipality playing a big role, but rather the prefect.
Okay, thanks.